It's been quite some time since Craig and we have recorded a podcast. So to resurrect the channel, I will read an article that I published on Craig's site today. It's called "There Was No Lab Leak. COVID-19 was spread intentionally." That's surely a controversial and provocative headline. Today, I will describe some of the evidence supporting it. The COVID-19 pandemic is long over. The headlines have shifted to a relentless cycle of blood invasions and political scandals. It's very tempting to file the years of lockdowns, vaccine tyranny, and assaults on freedom into a fold of unfortunate history and never open it again. Most have. But the victims and a few researchers continue to ask questions and demand answers. How many victims were there? Using UN population data, I have calculated that the pandemic years were associated with 20.5 million excess deaths. However, the total gross loss was a staggering 32 million people, as fewer babies were born than projected. This makes the pandemic comparable to World War I, which incurred a cost of 15 to 22 million deaths. But while historians have meticulously documented every bullet and bayonet of the Great War, the origin of the pandemic still remains a mystery. First, we were fed a narrative about the novel coronavirus having a natural origin. For good reasons, many suspected that this was a limited hangout. Then came the second story, catastrophic incompetence. Careless Chinese scientists allowed the virus to escape from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the rest of history. Unlike the narrative of a natural origin, there was some circumstantial evidence supporting the incompetence hypothesis, and many accepted it and moved on. In my new book, The New September the 11th, Solving the COVID-19 Pandemic, I present evidence that the virus was indeed made in a lab, but it did not leak by accident. Instead, suppressed genomic and epidemiological evidence strongly suggests that the virus was released on different continents within months of one another. What is some of that evidence? In the book, I rigorously analyze all the data and systematically dismantle the false narratives, misdirections, and cover-ups by both Beijing and Washington. To provide the full context in an article is impossible, which is why I wrote the book. However, I'll now explain the most important evidence in simple terms and in as few words as possible. In late December 2019, molecular biologists identified and sequenced the coronavirus for the first time in Wuhan. The strain was young, meaning that it had only circulated for a few weeks. Whether a lab leak or a spillover event at the wet market gave rise to the virus, they are both single-point origin hypotheses. The idea that the virus emerged in one location before spreading across the globe. If the single-point origin holds water, every variant across the globe is a direct descendant of the original parental strain in Wuhan. But this is not the case. Independent research groups from Italy, Brazil, Morocco, Angola, France, and others have conducted their own investigations into archived biological samples, identifying old strains of the virus long before it had even emerged in Wuhan. This is evidence of multiple viral introductions, a scenario that I have named the parallel release in multiple environments hypothesis. Here is a brief summary of one of the studies. While the pandemic was well underway, researchers at the University of Milan began a retrospective search for the virus within the archives. They were prompted by previous studies that had identified the virus before the official timeline, and a mysterious increase in a rash now recognized as a COVID-19 symptom. Knowing that pre-pandemic research is a highly controversial matter, the researchers took extreme precautions to avoid cross-contamination and false positives. They, for instance, used 183 control samples which never turned positive and performed every stage of the study in physically separate laboratories in a facility that was free from the coronavirus. Shockingly, multiple pre-pandemic samples were positive for RNA and/or antibodies. The earliest case dated back to September the 12th, 2019, an 8-month-old boy from Milan whose urine and serum samples were positive for the spike protein and 2 types of antibodies. This is long before the virus emerged in Wuhan. The researchers also sequenced the genetic material and confirmed that 9 of their patients had indeed been infected with the novel coronavirus in 2019. Most shockingly, the strains were old, not young, as they were in Wuhan months later. A technique called molecular clock analysis showed that the virus present in Italy had been circulating since mid-summer 2019. While the virus was circulating unnoticed in Italy, doctors were noticing unusual clusters of pneumonia, and a study of Google Trends data showed a statistically significant increase for the keywords fever, cough, and cold, but it could not be attributed to influenza. The key observation is that you cannot have old strains in Italy and months later young ones in Wuhan if the virus had a single point of origin. It is the equivalent of encountering grandchildren before the grandparents have even been born. This is hard evidence that there were multiple viral introductions on different continents. Nevertheless, lab leak proponents continue to deceive the masses about the origin of the pandemic. The Trump administration, for example, flatly lies that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into humans and that the virus emerged in late 2019 as a result of a research-related incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Hard evidence refutes these 2 claims. If the virus had been spreading elsewhere for much longer, why was it first detected in Wuhan? The answer lies in a highly effective and unique surveillance system that promptly identifies novel pathogens, which China rolled out in response to the original SARS virus. The system requires doctors to flag patients with an illness of unknown cause, combined with criteria such as an underarm temperature higher than 38 degrees Celsius. Any case is treated as a potential new pathogen and is sent directly for testing for SARS-like viruses, among others. In 2013, for example, the system identified the novel avian influenza A virus within weeks of the first case. No other country on Earth had this system prior to 2020. Unlike the relatively benign premise of a natural origin or leap from a single laboratory, the prime hypothesis opens a can of worms with many uncomfortable questions. As no plausible natural mechanism apparently exists, the probabilities shift from natural processes and incompetence to intent. The lab leak and natural origin hypothesis are limited hangouts, equivalent to the 19 hijackers who we know are not the full story. That's how I view it. Under this hypothesis, we must ask whether they, whoever they may be, merely initiated the event or intervened further. In my book, I present a full scientific inquiry into the Omicron variant, which appeared out of nowhere, fully formed, with dozens of mutations specifically optimized to bypass human immunity. In short, evidence of many kinds strongly suggests that it was also made in a lab and likely intentionally released in late 2021 on the African continent. If the COVID-19 pandemic was an engineered event, I predict that it won't be the last. Beyond elucidating the origin of the virus, my book, The New September the 11th, examines these important issues. 1. How the pandemic was intentionally mishandled and manipulated across the globe with very few exceptions, resulting in massive waves of death and disease. As bad as the virus may be, the response was far worse. The most totalitarian governments, even issued official decrees that were intended to and did kill scores of elderly in care homes. Deaths that were falsely attributed to the virus through massive statistical fraud. 2. Unprecedented fraud and deception by vaccine companies, mainstream institutions, and regulatory agencies paved the way for the COVID-19 vaccines. All major health concerns are systematically analyzed one by one using hundreds of peer-reviewed studies and data from numerous countries. 3. A comprehensive safety analysis of the most important conventional vaccines answers highly relevant questions such as, do any of them cause cancer, autism, or death? 4. Psychological warfare. How did governments make billions of people move in lockstep? I break down the secret behavioral strategies that were used to bypass critical thinking, turn neighbors against each other, and ultimately drive people towards the vaccines. In this world, empathy is a weapon and fear is a strategy. 5. Science for sale. A complete expose and deep dive into the criminal tactics of the drug industry, which have transformed toxic drugs into billion-dollar enterprises and major medical journals into information laundering operations. If you want to read the article, it's available on paulcraigroberts.org and my own website, which I recently launched, which you can find at rethinkgovernment.com. My book, The New September 11th, Solving the COVID-19 Pandemic, is available on Amazon and other online sites. If you enjoyed this audio, do tell me in the comment section below, and I will keep reading Craig's articles as well as my own and publish them here on YouTube. However, the most controversial of them I probably have to post on Rumble and BitChute, since YouTube has a nasty habit of censoring controversial content. That's all for now.